They've been lying to us our whole lives about how technological progress moves in a straight line, from primitive to complex, from horse-drawn carts to electric cars. But what if I told you that 120 years ago, our ancestors, or more precisely, those who lived here before us, possessed urban mobility technologies that modern engineers couldn't even dream of? Have you ever wondered why old photographs of 19th century cities look so strange? Empty, wide boulevards, majestic architecture that couldn't possibly be built with a chisel and hammer, and the strange absence of the traffic chaos we're used to. Historians feed us fairy tales that people back then got around exclusively on foot or in carriages, wading through manure. But that's a lie. A massive, brazen lie designed to hide the fact that we live amid the ruins of a more advanced civilization. Today we're going to uncover one of the most inconvenient facts for official science.
We're going to talk about a technology that worked flawlessly, carried millions of people, and was destroyed. Wiped from the face of the earth, so that you and I keep buying gasoline and sitting in traffic jams. We're talking about the moving sidewalks of Paris in 1900. Take a look at the official reports from the World's Fair in Paris, which opened on April 14, 1900. We're told it was a show of achievements, temporary pavilions made of papier-mâché and plaster. But amid these so-called temporary decorations was a mechanism whose scale and complexity make your hair stand on end. It was the Rue de l'Avenir, or Street of the Future. Imagine a giant wooden snake, a loop road 2.2 miles long that carried people around the fairground by itself. This wasn't a short escalator in a shopping mall that breaks down every week. This was a full-fledged transport artery elevated on a viaduct 23 feet high. According to official data, this behemoth consisted of two parallel belts. One moved at 2.5 miles per hour. The other, for express passenger delivery, flew at nearly 5.6 miles per hour. Just think about those numbers. 5.6 miles per hour for a continuous stream of people. No waiting for trains, no schedules, no crowds. But the most shocking thing isn't the speed, it's the capacity. Engineers from that era, who, if you believe the textbooks, had only just climbed down from a hay wagon yesterday, claimed a design capacity of 50,000 people per hour. 50,000. For comparison, modern high-speed tram or light rail lines in Europe consider it a success if they carry 15 or 20,000 passengers per hour during peak loads. And here, in the era of so-called steam boilers and cast-iron irons, there was a system that outperformed modern analogs by more than twice. How is that possible? Where did the technologies for precisely synchronizing thousands of wheels and shafts come from, so that this multi-ton structure wouldn't tear itself apart?
Official history mumbles to us about electric motors and genius self-taught engineers. But let's use logic. To create such a system, you don't just need an idea. You need an industrial base of the highest level. You need CNC machines, standardization of parts down to the micron, metallurgy of a quality we barely achieved in the second half of the 20th century. Do you really believe that they built such a behemoth just for entertainment for 6 months, only to dismantle it for firewood afterward? That's economic suicide. No investor, no sane government would pour colossal resources into creating the most complex transport infrastructure just to destroy it right after the exhibition closed. That contradicts the laws of the market, logic, and common sense. Unless this construction was actually an operation to legitimize an already existing facility, or, even more frightening, an operation to study the legacy inherited by the new masters of the world from the previous tenants. Look closely at the newsreel footage. The people on these moving platforms look bewildered. They don't resemble the creators of this technology.
They look like children who found Dad's complex tool and are riding it without understanding how it works. Ladies in long, uncomfortable dresses, gentlemen with canes. They're just passengers, users. They behave as if this sidewalk had always been there, or as if they were allowed to use it one last time before forever pulling the switch. Let's pose the question that historians diligently ignore. Why destroy something that works perfectly? Paris in 1900 was choking on traffic jams from fiacres and the first automobiles. This sidewalk solved the problem of urban mobility once and for all. It was eco-friendly, silent, and incredibly efficient. Leave it, extend the lines, and Paris would have become the most advanced city on the planet. But no. As soon as the exhibition closed, teams of workers arrived and began barbarically dismantling the mechanisms, cutting the metal, and burning the wooden walkways. Why such haste? What were they afraid of? Maybe that engineers from other countries would start asking too many inconvenient questions about how exactly the drive system worked. Or that someone would discover factory stamps from plants that didn't exist in the official registries of the 19th century. We see here the classic signature of a cover-up. Exactly the same way the magnificent exhibition buildings in Chicago, St. Louis, and San Francisco were destroyed. The scenario is the same. We build them, supposedly out of plaster, show them to the crowd, and then demolish them to the ground or burn them in mysterious fires. The street of the future in Paris became a victim of exactly such a cover-up. All they left us are photographs and short black and white clips showing happy Europeans riding on a technological marvel that we, with our iPhones and electric cars, can't replicate even today. After all, modern attempts to create moving walkways are limited to short, straight sections in airports. Try building a 2-mile loop route with turning mechanisms and elevation changes that will operate flawlessly for half a year outdoors. Modern engineers will tell you it's too expensive, too complex, and unprofitable. And in 1900, it was just entertainment. Don't you sense the catch here? Let's set aside the emotions and turn to the dry, stubborn facts that demolish the official picture of the world. Engineers and techies, lean into your screens, because now we're going to dissect the technical side of this wonder of the world, and you'll understand why the official version is the ravings of a madman. We're told that the Paris moving sidewalk was powered by a system of 172 electric motors. Sounds impressive, doesn't it? But anyone who's ever dealt with industrial mechanics will tell you that synchronizing 172 engines into a single network in 1900 was a task impossible for the technology of that time. They had no computers, no frequency converters, no complex electronics that could balance torque in real time. If one motor started spinning just a bit faster than another, or if a section of the belt experienced overload from a crowd of people, the fabric was bound to inevitably tear or derail. That's physics. You can't fool it with pretty engravings in newspapers. For such a behemoth to operate smoothly, without jerks that would knock ladies off their feet, it required perfect, jewel-like coordination of all the drives. We're talking about a control system for which no official analogs existed. Either there was a highly complex mechanical transmission stretching for miles underground, about which not a word in the reports, or those 172 motors were controlled by something we today would call a wireless control system. But officially, in that year, Marconi had only just been tinkering with transmitting a radio signal across the English Channel. So where did the technology for industrial automation at that level come from? The answer suggests itself. These mechanisms weren't invented at the end of the 19th century. They were most likely excavated and restored. Recall Piranesi's engravings or photographs of ruins after the so-called fires and floods. We see remnants of gigantic structures whose purpose we don't understand. The Paris exhibition was simply a demonstration of what they managed to get running. Now let's talk about materials science. The track length, 3,360 meters, that's thousands of tons of metal. Rails, wheel sets, load-bearing viaduct trusses. The steel quality had to be flawless. Any microcrack, any casting defect under such dynamic loads would have led to disaster on the first day. But there were no disasters. The system ran like clockwork. Where, in Paris or its surroundings, were the metallurgical plants capable of producing that volume of high-alloy steel in such a short time? Official data on French metallurgy output at the time are laughable compared to the volume of iron spent on the World's Fair alone. And besides the sidewalk, there were gigantic palaces built with metal frames, the Grand Palais itself. If you add up all the metal from the exhibition, you get figures exceeding the country's annual production. Where did the metal come from? Did they teleport it? Or maybe these structures had already been standing there for centuries and they were just cleaned up and repainted for the opening. Moving on. Energy. Moving such a mass requires colossal power. Officially, the exhibition was powered by the Palace of Electricity, a building of incredible beauty that looked like a temple, not a power station. They're showing us smokestacks from which smoke supposedly billowed. But look at the photographs closely. The snow-white facade of the palace standing in the city center. If they had been burning thousands of tons of coal there to generate the necessary megawatts, everything around would have been covered in a layer of black soot within a week. But Paris in the photos is clean. The facades gleam. No soot. Where did the energy come from? Maybe the smokestacks were decoration? Camouflage for a completely different principle of energy generation that didn't require burning fossil fuels? Inside the Palace of Electricity stood gigantic generators that look more like turbines from modern hydroelectric power plants, or, even more intriguingly, installations for receiving atmospheric electricity. The very technologies that Nikola Tesla would later talk about, and which were so quickly forgotten and classified. No less important is the question of logistics and construction. The exhibition construction timeline, just a few years. Imagine a construction site in central Paris. No tower cranes, no heavy trucks, only horses and wheelbarrows. How did they deliver these multi-ton parts to the height of the 23-foot viaduct? How did they assemble them with micron precision? We see photos of the finished result, but almost no photographs of the construction process of key components. They show us scaffolding, piles of debris, but never the moment of installing complex mechanisms. Why? Because that process could have revealed the true origin of the technologies. Maybe the builders were simply removing a layer of soil, freeing up already ready viaducts? That explains the speed, quality, and lack of blueprints in the public domain. And the most important question to the official version: where is the army of workers? To build such an object manually in 2 years, you'd need tens of thousands of qualified assemblers, mechanics, riveters. Paris's population was growing, but employment statistics from that time don't show such a concentration of specialists in one place. Moreover, where did these people disappear to after the exhibition? Where are their memories? Where are the memoirs, How I Built the Street of the Future? There are none, as if the work was done by ghosts. Or robots? Or, more likely, there was no construction in the usual sense. It was cosmetic repairs and launching of found heritage. They're brazenly lying to us, passing off restoration as innovation. They took what was ready, used it, and destroyed it so we couldn't do carbon dating and study the alloys. Destruction is the key moment. The moving sidewalk was dismantled with maniacal thoroughness.
The metal was smelted down, the documentation archived under secrecy stamps, or simply burned. Why destroy the goose that lays golden eggs? Why destroy a transport system that could have made Paris the capital of the world? The answer is simple and terrifying. The technology was too dangerous for the emerging oil and coal mafia. If people realized they could travel for free, silently and quickly, who would buy the first stinky Ford and Benz cars? Who would invest in expensive oil? The street of the future was doomed from the start because it showed an alternative path for civilization's development, a path that was stolen from us. Now, let's turn to what can't be faked, rewritten, or hidden behind beautiful papier-mâché facades. We're talking about demographics and human resources. Mathematics is a stubborn science, and it leaves no stone unturned from the official version of constructing Paris's Street of the Future. We're told that the end of the 19th century was the heyday of the industrial era, explosive population growth, and an endless stream of labor. But let's look at the numbers soberly. The official population of Paris at the time was about 2.5 million people. It seems like a lot, but how many of them were qualified engineers capable of calculating dynamic loads for a 2-mile belt? How many professional lathe operators, millers, and electricians were there? At that time, if you believe the same historians, a significant portion of the population was barely literate, and child labor was used everywhere just to survive. And so, these people, who were twisting cows' tails yesterday, suddenly stepped up to high-precision machines today and created a masterpiece of mechanics? It sounds like a bad joke. Look at the photographs of the crowds at the World's Fair. Who do you see there? Mostly idle, wandering crowds. Bourgeoisie dressed in strange, often absurd for hot weather, 3-piece suits and heavy dresses. They look like tourists who stumbled into a museum of another civilization. They poke at the mechanisms with their canes in amazement, not understanding how they work. Among them are no heroes of labor, no titans of thought who built all this. A persistent feeling emerges that the population of 19th century Europe was like cuckoos occupying someone else's nest. They came to the ruins, dug up what survived, cleaned it, repainted it, and called it their invention. This explains the strange architectural eclecticism of the exhibition. Ancient columns neighbor eastern domes and incredible metal structures. This isn't style. It's the chaos of heirs trying to adapt the remnants of former grandeur to their own needs. Let's return to the logistics question we touched on earlier, but now examine it from the standpoint of human resources. To build an object on the scale of the World's Fair from scratch in 2 to 3 years, as the guidebooks claim, Paris would have needed an army of workers numbering no less than 100,000 people. Where did they live? Where were their barracks, canteens, hospitals? Where are the gigantic dumps of construction waste that inevitably arise at such a scale of work? Historical archives are silent. We see no photographs of tent cities for builders. We see no logistics chains for delivering food to such a horde. It's impossible to hide if it really happened. The conclusion is clear. There was no large-scale construction. There was large-scale restoration. The city was already standing. The infrastructure, including tunnels and viaducts for moving sidewalks, already existed. The new masters of life just needed to start up the system, possibly replacing lost energy sources with primitive steam and electric drives that they could master. This explains the mismatch between capabilities and results. 19th century humanity physically couldn't handle such a project. They lacked the tools, the knowledge, and sufficient numbers of healthy adult men.
Recall how many wars and epidemics shook Europe in the preceding decades. The demographic gaps were colossal. So where did the millions of hands come from to build thousands of miles of railroads, tens of thousands of red brick buildings, and wonders like the Paris moving sidewalk? The answer lies in catastrophe theory and global reset. We're dealing with a post-apocalyptic society that was slowly recovering after some grandiose event that destroyed the previous, highly advanced civilization. Those we call inventors of the 19th century were actually talented archaeologists and reverse engineering engineers. Edison, Tesla, Eiffel. Perhaps their genius lay not in creating new things, but in the ability to decipher and adapt the old. Paris's moving sidewalk is the brightest example of Golden Age technology that ended suddenly and tragically. Why was it elevated on a viaduct? Maybe because the Earth's surface at the time of its original creation was unfit for travel? Or was it part of a multi-level urban system, where the lower levels were allocated for technical needs and the upper ones for people? We see only the tip of the iceberg, a fragment of the most complex infrastructure that the new inhabitants of Paris used as an attraction. Think about how quickly they abandoned this technology. As soon as the exhibition closed, they destroyed the sidewalk. Why? If they had really built it themselves, they would have been proud of it, replicated it, sold licenses to London, New York, Berlin. But they destroyed it as if covering up traces of a crime. Or as if they understood they wouldn't be able to maintain its operation. The safety margin built in by the creators had run out, and there was nothing or no one to repair the complex components. It was easier to dismantle it for scrap and forget it like a nightmare, replacing it with primitive buses and trams that broke down every day, but were at least understandable and simple to maintain. Look closely at the buildings of Paris past which this majestic street of the future glided. Lower your gaze down to where the pompous facades end and the sidewalk begins. What do you see? You see windows half buried in the ground, windows looking into the dirt, into the soles of passers-by's shoes. Historians call this the cultural layer. But any builder will tell you that a cultural layer doesn't grow 5 feet in 100 years unless you're living on a dump. These are traces of that very catastrophe we talked about. A global cataclysm. A flood of clay and soil engulfed the cities, burying the first floors and altering the landscape beyond recognition. And here the mystery of the moving sidewalk reveals itself with frightening clarity. Why was it elevated on a viaduct 23 feet high? The official version says, to not interfere with street traffic. But what traffic? Sparse carriages and lone automobiles? No. The moving walkway was elevated above the ground because the ground was unfit for life. It was a transport artery of the second level, preserved from that previous civilization that built cities in volume, not in plane. Imagine a city where pedestrians and light transport move along a system of viaducts and galleries, breathing clean air, while below, on the technical level, cargo transport happens, or the aftermath of that very mud flood lies. The people of 1900, our great-grandfathers, simply cleared the upper level. They found surviving segments, powered them up, and called it an attraction. They walked over the ruins of Titans, not realizing that under their feet was not just boards and steel, but the circulatory system of a deceased organism. This explains why the route was circular and closed. Probably the other branches were destroyed to such an extent that they couldn't be restored, and they were simply cut off, masking the dead ends with plaster pavilions. Now let's talk about the crime against humanity committed by those who ordered the destruction of this mechanism. Do you feel that sticky chill of realization? They switched us to another branch of reality. Instead of developing public, free, eco-friendly transport that operates on principles of magnetic levitation or atmospheric electricity, they forcibly switched us to gasoline needles. The destruction of the Paris moving walkway was not just dismantling. It was the ritual murder of a technology.
The elites who seized power after the catastrophe didn't need free people capable of moving through the city at the speed of the wind without paying a penny. They needed consumers. They needed chaos, traffic jams, accidents, insurance, fuel taxes. A system that works flawlessly doesn't generate super profits. A perfect mechanism is the enemy of capitalism built on scarcity and breakdowns. Imagine the horror that gripped the architects of the New World Order when they saw ordinary people joyfully riding the machines of the gods. What if one of the engineers figured out to disassemble the drive and found not primitive windings, but crystalline converters or mercury rectifiers? What if someone realized that electricity could be drawn straight from the ether, as the cathedral builders did? The risk was too great. Therefore, immediately after the exhibition closed, they descended on the Rue de l'Avenir like vultures. They broke, cut, smashed. Newspapers wrote that the city was returning to normal life. What normal? The stench of horse manure and the clatter of carts. They convinced us that degradation is normal, and God's technologies are temporary entertainment, a trick unworthy of serious application. This evokes not just sadness, it evokes rage. We could have lived in garden cities, where transport is silent and invisible, where there's no smog, where distance doesn't matter. But someone decided for us. Someone pressed the delete button and erased an entire branch of technological evolution. We live in an artificially created Middle Ages, surrounded by gadgets that are essentially just digital trinkets, distracting us from the fact that in fundamental things, in energy, construction, transport, we have degraded compared to the 19th century. We cannot replicate their masonry. We cannot replicate their casting. We can't even replicate their attractions. We are a cargo cult civilization. We build imitations, worship schemes we don't understand, and call progress what is merely a pathetic attempt to copy the lost. The 1900 moving walkway is evidence. It's proof that history was rewritten, the chronology shifted, and our ancestors were not who they are portrayed to be. They were not dirty peasants who suddenly saw the light. They were survivors trying to restart the remnants of a great machine. And they almost succeeded. But they weren't allowed. They were forced to forget. They, and us with them, were given a memory lobotomy. We've reached the finale of our investigation, and now the most important, most terrifying question stands before us. Why was this grand falsification needed? Why destroy technologies capable of turning life on Earth into paradise? The answer is simple to the point of banality and horrific in its cynicism. Power and control. The 1900 World's Fair in Paris was not a demonstration of the achievements of a new civilization. It was a farewell parade, a final sale, and an inventory of the heritage of the ancient world, which had been destroyed not long before. Those who seized power after the catastrophe, let's call them puppeteers, predictors, or simply the elite, faced a choice. They could give the surviving people, these lost orphans of the 19th century, the keys to all knowledge: free etheric energy, anti-gravity, frequency-based medicine, and transport systems like the Paris moving walkways. But then those people would become free, and you can't control a free person. You can't sell him gasoline, impose credit on him, or drive him to a factory to work for food. Therefore, the decision was made for a global reset. The Great Reset, which politicians talk about so often today,
didn't happen in the future. It happened then, in the mid-19th century. They rewrote history, extended the chronology by 1,000 years, inserting invented dark ages to hide the fact of a highly advanced civilization's existence quite recently. They've drilled into us that we are the pinnacle of evolution, that we barely crawled out of caves and only became human thanks to the steam boiler. But the Paris-moving sidewalks scream the opposite. We are not the pinnacle. We are degenerating descendants of titans, living on the ashes. We resemble savages who found a working smartphone and use it to crack nuts. Sometimes we manage to turn on the screen, and we call it a scientific discovery. The destruction of the street of the future was an act of ritual memory erasure. By leaving this technology, the elites risked someone starting to ask questions. Why don't the motors overheat? Where does the electricity come from without wires? Why doesn't the metal rust? To preserve the matrix of lies, they had to remove from reality all artifacts contradicting the primitive picture of the world. They left us only what can be monetized: oil, gas, coal, medicine that treats symptoms but not diseases. They built a civilization of consumption on the bones of a civilization of creation. Think about how the world would have changed if the concept of city-wide free mechanical transport had prevailed. There would be no car companies, no oil wars. City ecology would remain pristinely clean. But that was an unprofitable path for those who print money. Today we live in an illusion of progress. They gave us the internet and gadgets so we'd bury our faces in screens and not look around. Because if you raise your eyes, the truth becomes unbearable. We see St. Isaac's Cathedral, which can't be built with modern cranes. We see polygonal masonry in Peru and Kronstadt. We see star forts scattered around the world according to a single plan. And we see photographs of Paris in 1900, where people with sad eyes ride on a technological marvel that would be scrapped in a month. This feeling of loss that you may be experiencing right now is genetic memory. Deep down, each of us knows that the world should be different, more just, more technological, more magical in the true sense of the word. Official history is a screen behind which the true masters of this world hide, those who appropriated the heritage of the previous era and dole it out to us by the teaspoon, calling it innovations. But the truth seeps through like water through a dam. The internet, which they created for control, has become a tool of awakening. We are starting to compare facts. We are starting to see inconsistencies. The Paris moving walkway is just one thread. Pull that thread, and the entire ball of lies will start unraveling. You will learn about wireless electricity that lit up cities without poles. You will learn about acoustic technologies capable of lifting multi-ton blocks. You will learn that we are not alone in the universe, and perhaps have never been alone on this planet.